Hello, everybody. Welcome to our very first webinar. We've got just over 100 people registered this evening. We've got 8 people that have joined us so far. So my name is James White. My day job is I'm a letting agent and estate agent. I'm just going to talk for a little bit as people start to arrive. What would be really handy right now is just to introduce yourself. There's a chat box just to the left of the screen there. It'd be great. Please feel free to say hi, introduce yourself. And as people start to arrive, then we can interact. Just as a bit of a feel of how this platform runs is myself and Malcolm, my father and business partner. We're going to be talking about lettings legislation. And then in the room as well, we've got Peter Booker with Booker Law, Setfords solicitors, and Dave Mills as well with Compass Finance. Some fantastic speakers. They're going to be delivering a lot of high-value content tonight, and we're really looking forward to having them speak. We've got a few people just sort of signing in saying, hi, Judith, how you doing? It's great to see you. And yeah, please just feel free to say hi. How tonight is going to run, we're going to start off probably in just a few minutes or so as and when more people arrive. And then I'll pass you over to Malcolm, who will be giving us a bit of a lettings update, an update of what's happening in the lettings market and the sales market, specifically kind of looking at Salisbury area and the Winchester area. And then I'll hand over to Dave, who's going to talk about mortgages and financing. And for us investors, it's obviously quite key to be able to take on more property and build our portfolios and really look to develop that. So he's going to be coming on points and talking a lot about that. And I'd really invite you as well, whilst people are talking, to ask questions. And then whilst people are talking, whilst Dave and Peter are talking, I can invite the questions to them, and then we can do a bit of a Q&A session and hopefully get your questions answered. But on top of that, if we don't have time to get around to everybody, then it's a great idea to be able to see if you can book in a one-to-one conversation with them, and then to really take a deeper dive in getting the information that you need out of this. And the same goes for Peter and for Malcolm as well. It's a little bit about me. My name's James. Again, my day job is a letting agent and a estate agent. I used to be a ship's captain and a yacht captain, and about 6.5 years ago, I had to grow up and get a real job as myself and my family, or my wife, decided to start a family and come away from the sea. And I actually used property investing as the method on how to transition, and I've started to take that through to my work today, and now just really keen on working with people to be able to help them do a similar sort of thing, whether it's to raise further income, to add to their income streams, revenue streams, or to produce a pension for them. I'm really focused on helping people do that, and I know Malcolm is, and Peter and Dave are as well. So this is why we're putting this together to help you guys. Hi, Richard Parsons. Hope you're well. Thanks for saying hi. So we've got quite a few people in the room now, so I think I will go ahead and start. And hopefully we can all see this. Just as a quick check, can everybody hear me okay? Can you give me a couple of thumbs up in the chat box just to tell me that you can hear me okay? Dave and Peter, thanks very much. Appreciate that. There's, just so you're aware as well, sort of there probably will be a 5-10 second delay in the chat box. But Tina, thank you very much for the thumbs up there to let me know that you can hear me. That's brilliant. Great stuff. So first up, I want to introduce you to Malcolm, my father and business partner. Thanks, Judy. Really appreciate that. I'll hand over to him for the lettings update and the sales update.
Hi there. Good evening, everybody. I'm the the older statesman. So I've been involved with property investing and letting for well, quite a few years. I'll put it that way. So my wife and I have been investing, doing conversions and updates on properties. We still have our own lettings portfolio. James and I also used to run the Salisbury Property Investors Network, for those of you who know of that. So what I've tried to do, because obviously I appreciate some of the people on board are probably relatively new to investing and others will be very experienced. So if you can bear with a slightly slow start, if you're very experienced, you'll see where I'm coming from. May seem cheesy, but why buy to let? Clearly, there are a number of ways we can make money. Most of us need to make money of some sort, and obviously you can be employed, which makes you active in that role. Self-employed, also active in that role. You can be running a business, which, by my own experience, is generally very active. But in terms of investments or property investments, you can have obviously be active in that, or passive, and that's where buy to let obviously comes in. In terms of the rental market, if we put a property on the market at the moment, certainly around where we are, we can quite easily get 20 or 30 inquiries from tenants in just within a few days. And so what we do is target, we do a 360-degree video, which is quite unusual for a letting agent. A lot of letting agents, you're lucky if you get a floor plan, let alone a video. And we do a 360-degree video. The reason we do that is we send that out to the 30 would-be applicants. If they like it, they can then apply for the let. And of course, we then get their basic financial information before we do a viewing. But properties are letting really quickly. I do think in the UK we have, or in England anyway, we have a shortage of buy-to-lets, and there's certainly demand out there, which we see a lot. In terms of rents, you can see from this slide I've put together, obviously we're here in the southeast or southwest, dependent how you define Winchester and Salisbury. But you can see the average rents have gone up in the last year or so by 7.5%, just over that in the southwest, and just a little under that in the southeast. But nonetheless, it's quite a healthy place to be investing. In terms of actual growth and annual change in the prices, I'm sure you've read this in the paper, but prices have been going up by something just over 10%, depending quite where you are. And you can see here in the southwest, prices have gone up by about 13.6%, the southeast 12.6%. So you can look at that both ways. If you already own buy-to-lets, obviously prices are going up, values are going up. If you're looking to buy, then obviously it's a case of looking for the deals that are out there, and in terms of the off-market properties as well. One of the things we see is a number of people looking to buy, obviously, and looking for good deals from their point of view. But we also work with a number of landlords who are looking to sell. And part of our role is to bring people together. In terms of the gross rental yields, you can see the sort of different extremes here. Clearly, right up in the northwest, the rents will be higher than down south in general. But conversely, a lot of the properties are not very expensive and would not give you much capital growth. Now, you're probably wondering what on earth this is. Obviously, it's a map. What I've done is put together a comparison between Salisbury and Winchester. Two cities not very far from each other, in many ways quite similar, but in terms of property, they are a world apart. Salisbury, I would like to think, is a more, dare I say, normal place. And what this is reflecting, the different colours reflect flats, terraced houses, semi-detached and detached. And obviously what this map is showing us is where the main investment areas are, unless you're into buying very expensive detached houses. This slide is slightly different. I've stripped out all of the expensive properties, and the light green dots here you'll see are flats, and the dark green, actually this one down here is a semi, which rather surprised me, but the dark green are terraced. Now, all of these properties sold in the last year, last 12 months, for under £100,000. And I think that's quite a deal. In terms of the average prices in Salisbury, so the blue bars here are Salisbury, you can see the flats are typically sort of 150, 160k to buy. Obviously, there are cheaper ones, as I just showed you. And terraces are about 250 or so thousand. Semis probably creeping up towards 300. But if I go on to the next slide and we look at the rents, you can see the rent for a flat is about 800, 850 a month. For terraces, it's a little bit more, probably about 1,000, and semis probably creep up a little bit from that, sort of around the 1,100, 1,200 mark. If you can try and hold those figures in your minds just for a moment, if we then look at Winchester, once again, obviously it's a different shape, Winchester, in terms of the city. But we're doing a similar sort of thing. You can see a lot of the detached properties are on the outer circumference here. Now this one, there were no properties under sort of less than 100,000. So this is illustrating properties that are up to 250 or above. And once again, they're flats and terrace properties. But once again, you can identify, and we use this technology to identify where the main investment areas are and where the main opportunities are. So I hope that kind of makes sense. Now relating it to the actual pricing, so a flat will typically in Winchester be 260 or 270, somewhere around about that. Let's see, this is the bright blue bar. Terrace properties, would you believe, probably average about 500,000, which is rather different to somewhere like Salisbury. Interestingly, the semis are more or less the same sort of pricing, although that is, I think, a mix of where they are in terms of the developments in the town. And then conversely, you can see from the tall column here, a detached house could easily be 800 or so K plus. Once again, if I move on to the rental figures, flats sort of about 1,000 to 1,100, subject to where they are and condition, of course. Terraces around the 1,500 to 1,600 mark, and the semi-detached around the same sort of figure. The detached sort of around the 2K mark. Once again, these are all averages, as I'm sure you'll understand. So if I take that and put it into kind of what I call a capital appreciation, are we looking for capital appreciation or income? And what is, I would ask you to ask yourself the question, what's important to you. I mean, if you take an area or a very cheap flat in Salisbury, for example, it will be quite practical to get something like a 9% yield, which sounds very good, of course. On the other hand, if you're looking at high capital appreciation, your yield will probably drop down quite considerably. If you're investing in a detached property, for example, 2.5% yield on the rent is probably somewhere around where you will be. And conversely, if you sort of say, well, actually, we would like some capital appreciation, but we would like a better yield than that, a better rental figure than that. Obviously, you would be somewhere in the middle, and dependent on the area, a 5.5%. Certainly in Salisbury would be very attainable. But you would have seen with the previous figures in Winchester, you've got some great properties. They are going up in value, and over the ups and downs of property pricing, they've always done pretty well, I would have to say. But conversely, if you're looking for a half decent yield, a property that will still go up, obviously subject to what's going to happen in the UK, then going for a mix of the two would allow you to get the growth you need, the capital appreciation you need to continue to invest in your portfolio. I'm sure a lot of you have read about what's different predictions about what's going to happen on the property pricing moving forward. Obviously, mortgages or interest rates are going up. I think our speculation, our thinking is that prices will slow down, or price increases will slow down. We don't ourselves see a massive crash happening, but by the time we get to the end of this year and into next year, we may be looking at a fairly flat property price market with maybe just a few percent increase per annum over the whole year. So I hope that makes some sense. We also run what we call a buy-to-let advice workshop with a range of subjects, not to sort of tell you how it all works, but to invite you to understand what you need to do to grow your portfolio, if that's what you'd like to do. And we will be sending out an invitation on the buy-to-let advice next workshop. We normally do charge for that, but as you've kind of come along to this, we will invite you along for free to our next workshop. And if you would like to have a 30-minute one-to-one with either myself or James to discuss your planning, property planning over the next couple of years, do click the link that you should have.
Yeah, should be published.
Should be appearing on your screens. So that's me done. I'll hand back to James to introduce your next speaker.
Great stuff. Thanks, Malcolm. We've obviously seen rents increase by 7.5%, and we've seen prices increase by 12 to 13%. So if anybody has any questions, guys, please put it in the chat box. I have one question, and that is property investing still a good thing to do? Is now a good time to still invest in property?
Assuming that was addressed to me.
It was.
I think it is. I mean, it's one of those things. Do you invest in property? What sort of property do you want, and what do you actually want to achieve? And there's a whole range of different investment types out there, and certainly those of you experienced will know that. But quite often it's finding the right deal, the right price, with properties that are available possibly with tenants in situ, possibly not. Maybe that need refurbishing, possibly not. And we've been investing, my wife and I have been investing now for, anyway, quite a long time. And the one thing I've never seen is rents go down. And obviously, property prices can go up and down. Those that have been sort of been doing this for a while have seen some ups and downs, but I have never seen rent go down. So if you're looking for a steady income, have a property developed, property investment plan developed, and work through that one step, one property at a time.
Yeah, great advice, definitely. And indeed, with rent rates, we and letting agents actually write in a rent increase of usually 5% every year that the tenant stays. So, but if you do want to book in a scheduled free call with Malcolm or myself on this subject, you can do so on this offer. Either that, or I'll bring this back up later on. But moving on now, I want to introduce Dave Mills, please, Compass Finance. Dave, welcome.
Thank you, James. Good morning, good evening, everyone. Hope everyone's well. So, I've got the evening right, which is good. So yeah, I'm Dave Mills from Compass Personal Finance. So I've been a financial advisor now for over 20 years. I had hair when I started. It's sadly gone. So I'm going to have a little chat to you today about buy-to-let mortgages. So I've aimed this at quite a high level, so not really knowing who was in the room. So we'll whisk through it. But obviously at the end of that, if you've got any questions or anything, please ask. If you've got any throughout the presentation, please ask. James is more than happy to come in and interrupt and stop me and ask the question. So yeah, more than happy to do that as well.
Just out of curiosity, sorry, can I interrupt for a second? So the people in the room, would you mind giving, if you don't mind, giving an indication of your experience in property investing? Maybe if you've got maybe 1 to 3 properties, put 1 or something like that, or if you've got 3+ properties, put 3 or something like that. Would just help to gauge us as to what type of people in the room. So sorry to interrupt. That's right. Dave, carry on.
Thank you, James. He will do this. He will interrupt every now and again. That's what he does.
Of course.
I like him.
And wave my flags.
Okay, so let's go buy-to-let mortgage. So just really the basics on buy-to-let. So I might be teaching some people to suck eggs, but I think a lot of people don't know the difference between a buy-to-let and residential. So mainly homeowners can get a buy-to-let, although it's not strictly true. There are first-time buyers mortgages, but there's probably only a couple of people who are going to do that, lenders-wise. But you generally would need a decent credit score to get the mortgage. But it looks like a lot of people here have already got mortgages or have got a buy-to-let portfolio. And we've got a mortgage advisor. Excellent. Hi, Pamela. Hope you're well. So I'm really teaching you, aren't I, to suck eggs on this. So we've got personal income. So yes, you will probably need a personal income for most lenders. They'll say that you would need a minimum of 25,000. However, there are probably the 2 biggest lenders in the UK who will not ask for income. They'll look at what the rental income is and discard any income that you may or may not have. So there is a buy-to-let for any sort of level of incomes. We do have some lenders who will have a lower minimum income of 15,000. So it's when we talk to people, we find out all about you guys. We'll find out what your income is, what your level of experience is, and normally there will be a lender out there to help you out. The rental income is probably the most the thing that we look at most on a buy-to-let. So that's how they're going to base on what you can borrow. So they've got a what's called a stress rating for that. And again, I'm not going to go into too much detail with that because it's quite hard to work out. It'll depend whether you got a 2 or 5 year fixed rate. But basically, the amount that you can borrow will be based on what your rental or what your proposed rental will be. And again, we'd take you through all that when we speak to you. Repayment interest only. You have the option of doing a capital and interest mortgage or an interest only mortgage. I would say 90% of our investors would do interest only. They're looking at capital growth and monthly income. So basically looking at, if you put 50,000 into a property, you're looking to get, when you sell the property, you're looking at getting more out than that, but also to get yourself an income whilst you've got the property. So occasionally we do repayment mortgages, and that might be for someone who's looking to maybe pass the property on to children at the end of it. So they've got a asset there that is unencumbered. So again, it's what works for you really, but you can do both. You can have a buy-to-let mortgage. There's one lender that has no minimum age. So in theory, you could be 100 and still have your buy-to-let mortgage, still have your income coming in, because they do base it on, obviously, on the rental income. There are other lenders who do have a minimum term, but again, there's probably a buy-to-let mortgage for everyone, which is good. Last one on this particular is your tax position. Now that's something that has changed a lot over the last sort of 5 to 6 years. I'm not a tax expert. I'm not an accountant, so we'd always say talk to an accountant. However, whereas you used to be able to offset the mortgage interest, that's not true these days. The government stopped that, which is why I think the buy-to-let market did sort of falter a little bit. And I think it's a really good time now to get back into it, because there is a great need for buy-to-let properties. And basically a lot of our big investors, say 100 properties plus, they're getting now a massive tax bill. So they've been looking at really getting rid of properties at this time, as opposed to taking on properties, which has left a little bit of a shortfall in the market for people looking to rent. So as a rental period, or as a potential landlord, it's a great time to actually do it. It's just really how your tax positions work. So there's very little now you can offset against tax with a buy-to-let mortgage on the finance side. So it's something we'd have a chat with you about. We'd probably recommend that you spoke to your accountant as well, just to make sure that you're aware of your tax positions on that. So this would be typically if you bought a buy-to-let in your own name. That is how it was set up. So what a lot of people have done, because of the tax implications these days, is actually looked at a limited company buy-to-let. So how does this work? Well, basically, you would set up a company. So it might be James White Homes. James has set up his company today. It will be what's called an SPV company. There he is. Look, you see, you mentioned James White, and off he appears. He comes in. So James has just today set up his company. He's got no accounts for his company. It's literally a day one setup company. It will be set up on what we call certain SIC codes, which is how you register with Companies House. And that basically will allow James to buy a property or let property within the company. There are 5 specific SIC codes that you have to set the company up. And again, we can give advice on all of that. Once the company's set up, then actually what the lenders are going to do is that company will be the name on the mortgage. But what they will do is they'll ask for personal guarantees from the directors. So basically, it's a mortgage into company name based on the directors. So again, it will be similar to how the residential mortgage is set up. But the main difference will be is the limited company has various good tax breaks. So you can offset your mortgage, interest on your mortgage on a limited company, because it's a company loan, not a personal loan. Again, accountants, you're paying corporation tax on the money if you don't take it out of the company, and that's where you'd use your accountant as well and they could advise you if it's a good time to do a limited company mortgage or not. So there are really good plus points for limited company mortgages. However, there's always a downside. So the rates tend to be higher. The lenders know that you can offset a lot of the finance costs. So they will charge you generally higher fees for the mortgages. They will charge you higher rates. Generally, there's lenders that you'll use will be off the high street. So you won't see your Barclays, although actually you will see your Barclays, that's a lie. You won't see your Santanders, you won't see your NatWestern limited company mortgages. You'll see a lot of companies maybe you haven't heard of. There'll be a couple you would have done, but they're more niche. So you need to take personal guarantees, which talk to someone like Peter, who's on next, to make sure that you're going to take independent legal advice. So there are some downsides to it, but generally, I think limited companies is probably the way forward. Especially if you're looking at I saw some people have got 7 mortgages there, 7 properties. If you're looking at 7 properties, probably a limited company would be the way forward for you, just on the tax position. But again, what we'd say is have a word with your accountant first, and then we'll take you through the limited company mortgage. But it's not something you should be afraid of. It's an easy process once you get your head around the fact that the company owns it and you are directors of that company. The only other thing I'd say on that is if you are thinking about doing that, the lenders will want every director and every shareholder on the mortgage. So make sure that when you do your set the company up, that the directors, there's at least 1 director, but no more than 4. And don't give shares to children and stuff like that at this stage, because the lenders will come back and probably not want to lend to you because they're shareholders above the mortgage. So also with limited company mortgages, you can do HMO properties. You can do those in private names, and you can do those in limited company names. So what are they? So they typically does depend on the area of the country. So they can be anything from 4-bedroom houses up to infinity bedrooms houses. And this is when the council would ask you to get an HMO license. So this is multiple occupancy houses. You're probably aware of those. And these are typically, you'll find these for professional sharers or for the students. So I know in Winchester, where James works a lot, there's a lot of HMOs for the university there. We do quite a fair bit of these because although that they are probably more hassle, I'm sure James will better tell you more about that. The actual income, the yield from them is a lot better because you're paying per room as opposed to one property. So the main differences between buy-to-lets and HMOs is, number one, is we're going back to the rates again. The rates tend to be higher. They will charge you more fees for those normally. The lending is a bit more nichey. So again, it might be lenders you may not specifically have heard of. Also with HMOs, they'll be based on a room-by-room basis. So they'll look at what rent you can get per room as opposed to what rent one house would get from a family. So you tend to be able to borrow a little bit more on HMOs. You tend to pay a little bit more for them on rates and fees. However, your profit tends to be slightly more. What I will say, and I'm sure James will back me up, is you do need to get a good letting agent, or you do need a good manager for your HMOs, because they tend to be the ones that, you've got 4 different people in them. There tend to be a few more problems going on. So, but a really good way to make some money, really, HMOs, once you can get them set up. And again, James would be the guy to talk to, James and Malcolm, to get that set up for you. And then we come on to multi-unit properties, and a lot of people get those confused with HMOs. So what a multi-unit property would be is, let's say that there's a house, it's been split up into 4 flats, but those flats are not on their own leases. So that would be basically 1 freehold. Someone's converted it into 4 bedsits or 4 flats. A lot of lenders won't like them because basically the freehold is the same. So it's still 1 house officially. So what we have to do there is again, we have to go to a specialised lender who will be happy then to look at what we call multi-unit properties. So this could be anything above 2 flats. It could be, we've done one recently where we had a bungalow and 3 flats, and the garage was converted into 3 flats, all rented out. But that was all on 1 freehold. So again, these are really good for income. They're really good for students, for professional sharers, even depending on the property. If it is something where you've got them remote, so you've got the garage has been converted, they can be good for just family lets as well. But they're going to be specialised lending. So we would say, well, come and let's have a chat with you on that. Let's sit down and actually we can explain how that works. And again, I'm not going to go into too much detail today on that. So the best thing to do is probably have a chat with us, book in a time to have a call back, and we can sort of sit down and find out which one of these areas actually fits you the best. So that's pretty much it from me. I know it's exciting stuff for mortgages, so I'm sure there's loads of questions. So please feel free.
It is exciting times. Yeah, thanks for that, Dave. That was fascinating. I was really interested to hear about the mortgage product with no minimum age. I've not heard of that one before. How does that work?
Yeah, so you can, literally, if you're 80, you can take a 30-year mortgage with them. So they've got a maximum term of 30 years, but there's no maximum age as such. So I think a lot of it is because people are looking to diversify. So older people are looking to make money as well. Yeah. So the traditional ways of savings and everything aren't working. So it's a good way to do that, and also they can leave that again to family and things. So and that can be insured and stuff like that. So yeah, it's there's going to be more of that, I think, because we're becoming an older nation.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, Tim has written in the chat box a question about limited companies versus LLPs from a mortgage perspective. Can you give us any content on that? Yeah, so
I mean, mainly limited company mortgages are really a limited company in name only. So basically, the mortgage, although it's in the company name, it is all based on the lender, on the directors. So, for example, if me and you buy a property, James, and we set up Mills and White Property Company, that will be the name on the mortgage. However, the lender will go look at both of us individually, and they'll use our income, they'll use our credit score, they'll use what we do work-wise and that sort of thing. So, really, from a limited company point of view, then you have to really set up that. It's not strictly true. There are a couple of lenders who'll let you use any limited company, but generally you have to set up the SPV company for that. So it would be a limited as opposed to an LLP.
Great stuff. Yeah, we're using limited companies, as you know, at the moment to help buy our HMOs and stuff like that, and seem to be working really well. But great.
The other thing you'd probably say is the rates are higher than when you look at the residential buy-to-let market. The fees are higher, but they do that for a reason because they are quite niche at the moment, and they know that you can offset.
Yeah, definitely. Great stuff. Well, thanks for that question, team. I really appreciate it. If you want more information on that, then please feel free to contact Dave and ask him any specific questions. We can follow up afterwards. Chris has put a statement and question in the chat box. Income from limited owned buy-to-lets would be taxed at corporation tax, i.e. 20%, which would be beneficial for a higher rate taxpayer if rent treated as personal income for tax purposes.
Yeah, so he's right. It's 19% corporation tax. So yeah, we're pretty much there. So as long as you don't, if you take, it'll be like any other. So if you want to take an income from it, you could take salary and dividend. But whilst it's in the company, you're only paying 19% tax. So depending on if you left it in the company, then in theory, the profit in the company, then you're just paying you 19% on it. Whereas if you're earning over 50,000 a year, and you've got a private buy-to-let, then you're paying 40% on pretty much everything, all your rent coming in. So it doesn't work for everyone in limited company buy-to-lets, but I would say higher rate taxpayers and above and portfolio landlords, it probably would be working pretty well for them.
So would it be safe to say if we have an investor whose annual income was below 50,000, would it be safe to say the advice would generally be, obviously speak to your accountant, but max out your 20%?
Yeah, it depends on how much you'll be under, because then you have to then take into consideration what rent they're going to have coming in. So if that's going to budge them above 50%. Some people don't like the idea of a limited company because, again, on dispersal, there's other complications which accountants will talk to them about. So it is on a, we've got clients who will do a one-man band. He'll do it in a limited company, and And we've got a lot of clients I've got a client who's got over 50 properties, and none of them are in a limited company. He's feeling the pinch a bit now, to be honest, because he's getting taxed from last 5 years. His tax bill's gone through the roof, and he's now trying to put them in limited companies, which isn't as easy as you think, because literally the limited company's got to buy you from you. But then you've got stamp duty. Stamp duty is still charged a double stamp duty.
Yeah,
well.
and any capital gains tax liability there as well.
Yeah, it's sort of on the tax side of things. Like I said, I'm not a tax expert, but on the tax side of things, where you're not paying one tax when you come to sell, you get your capital gains, and there are other taxes that you'll have to pay within disposal of company assets. And again, I would say talk to your accountants on that.
Great stuff. Well, Chris, I hope that sort of covers a little bit about your question there. If you do want to dive into it more, Dave has advisors, I have advisors. So if you do want to speak to a property tax expert and get any questions that are specific to you and your situation, then please let us know. We can get you in contact with somebody. But thanks for that, Dave. That was brilliant. Well done. Well done. Right. Moving on to Peter. Peter's with Setfords Solicitors, Booker Law, and he's going to be talking to us about property conveyancing and what it's like to buy and sell property. Thank you very much, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, James. Evening, everybody. As James said, my name's Peter Booker, and my company consults through a company that's quite well known, Setfords. Now, please don't get bored. Please don't switch off. I know a lot of people think about solicitors and think boring, stuffy, glasses perched on the end of nose. I'll try and keep it light and airy and make it interesting, so that we actually get a bit of value from today. By way of a bit of an overview, so my background, my journey started in 2005 to get to where I am. So I went through all of the usual college studying, university, practical on the job experience, and I qualified in 2014. From that point onwards, all I've done is property, residential property and commercial property, morning, noon and night. I think it's one of those things, a lot of other lawyers call me mad, but you really have to have a passion for it and you really have to love it. So that's a bit of background to me. A little bit of red tape before we jump into the evening. We're going to go through some general concepts tonight, some general ideas. Please don't take it as gospel and please don't take it as legal advice. There are so many different nuances that can apply to each individual circumstance. So if you've got any specific questions, please do reach out during either while I'm talking or during the Q&A at the end or afterwards. More than happy to have a chat to talk it through to make sure that you get the right advice for your situation. But so we're going to go for a little bit of a hop, skip and a jump through the conveyancing process to hopefully give you a bit of an idea of some potential minefields and pitfalls to watch out for. Now, this next slide is truly horrible, and it's horrible intentionally. And there's an awful lot going on there, and that's just to show the level of different steps that go on in a normal purchase and sale transaction. So this is without, and please don't feel that you have to read every single word. There's a lot going on there, far more than I'd ever put on a normal slide. But that's without taking into account any headaches or any title defects that need to be overcome. And I think most of you have got at least one or two properties, so I won't go into it in an awful lot of depth, as you should imagine know the process to an extent. But in essence, buyer's solicitor will receive a bundle of paperwork relating to the property, go through it, raise any questions on the title. They're making sure that the property has the necessary rights to get in and out, to make sure that the services can be received to the property. And they're making sure that any alterations that we're aware of have, they're making sure, thank you very much, James, I'm pleased you like the slide. They're making sure that any alterations have got the appropriate building regulation certification. And that's really important, that we have a good relationship with the estate agents and the surveyors, as we only get the paper view of the property. We don't have the privilege of going out and actually seeing property anymore these days. So it's so important that we see the surveys, and if there are any alterations, we get made aware of them. So once we've gone through those papers, typically we'll apply for the usual conveyancing searches, and I won't dwell on those because I'll go into them in a bit more detail in a moment. In the meantime, hopefully we've had answers back to the questions that have been raised. Then the solicitor will prepare a report, go through that, normally in writing, but I think it's always helpful to have a conversation. Because we're human beings, and most of us like to talk things through to make sure that everyone understands what's going on. Up to this point, no one's bound in any way, shape, or form. So up until the point that contracts are exchanged, either party could decide that the transaction's not right for them, or the property's not right. If it's an investment, that the numbers just don't stack up. If you've done a bit more investigating, when we get past the point of having reports raised, signed paperwork, moving around, it's starting to get towards the crunch point. So when we exchange contracts, that's when both parties to the transaction will become bound. That will fix the date for completion. And if you were to change your mind after that point, all kinds of financial nasties kick in. You'd almost certainly forfeit your deposit if you changed your mind after that, and be liable for all kinds of other financial nasties. So, so it is an important step. Before we get to that point, I can't not speak about mortgages after Dave's wonderful presentation. But before we get to exchange of contracts, if there's a mortgage involved, we should have received a mortgage offer, and we'll be preparing a report on that, but also making sure that the property and the paperwork that we've got complies with the lender's instructions. And what also often gets forgotten about is that whilst the solicitor's acting for the buying client, they'll also be acting for the lender as well. So there'll be competing duties there. And most lenders are happy for solicitor to act for themselves and also the buyer, apart from some commercial borrowing. But it's worthwhile bearing that in mind, that sometimes it might seem that the solicitor's being a pain and being pernickety over certain things that aren't overly worrying to you. But it might be that the instructions that they've got from the mortgage company mean that those I's have to be dotted and those T's really have to be crossed. So if we fast forward past exchange of contracts and get to the point of completion, keys will change hands, and if it's an investment, you can crack on with letting it, refurbing it, whatever it is that you've got planned. But the job doesn't stop there. On the buying side, the solicitor's still got the obligation to register the mortgage and the purchase at the land registry to make sure that the official record is updated, that you genuinely own the property. And on the selling side, the solicitor's got to deal with the redemption of the old mortgage, as no buyer wants to end up paying someone else's mortgage that's hung over. And that's a really, really quick hop, skip, and a jump through the purchase side of a transaction in buying a property. I said I'd come on to searches in a bit more detail, and there's a lot less going on this slide. I'm much happier looking at this screen, but there's the main ones are up on the screen there. So chancel repair, we thought it was an issue that was going away back in 2013, but one way or another it still clung on. And chancel repairs an obligation to contribute towards the repair of the chancel of your local church, and local can be anything from a couple of 100 yards through to a good number of miles. It's all based on old parish boundaries. So you can carry out searches to establish whether the property is in a chancel repair area, but it's far cheaper and more time effective nowadays to pop in place an indemnity policy, just so that if there is a liability that crops up, then you're not going to be out of pocket. There are some horrendous cases. I wouldn't normally say go and have a look on Google, but if you pop into Google chancel repair liability and bill, it can range into hundreds of thousands of pounds if legal disputes kick off about it. So for the cost of the indemnity policy, it's well worth it. Then the next one on the list is an environmental search, and that one will look at all kinds of different things relating to the environment. So the big headline is that it's based on public records rather than any actual investigations taking place on site, and it's making sure that the property is not built on land that's classified as contaminated, as that can come with all kinds of obligations and liabilities. But at the same time, it'll also give you a rating about the flood risk potential for the property, and whether or not there's anything going on in the area in terms of energy infrastructure, so new pipelines for oil supply, which, believe it or not, are worryingly common. Whether there's any proposed solar farms or wind farms in the local area, all kinds of stuff that, although if you're buying a typical residential property, probably won't be too much of a concern, if it was going to be right on the doorstep, especially if we're thinking about an investment property. We need to think about, will another buyer be upset about this in the future, and is this something that might be a thorn when we try and come to sell the property? So the next search on there was a drainage and water search, and that very much does what it says on the tin. In an ideal world, it will confirm that the property is connected to the public sewerage system and also to the public water system. If not, if we're looking at properties that are a bit more rural, it might be that it's served by a private drainage facility that doesn't crop up that often in our neck of the woods. So the local authority search is the next one that's on that list, and that one will give all kinds of information. Most importantly, it will confirm the extent of the roads that are adopted and the responsibility of the highways agency in the vicinity of the property, ideally right up to the driveway, so that we know we don't have to have any other repair costs. But it'll also give a planning overview and a building regulations overview. So it helps us to gain a real full picture of the background to the property. And so the last one on that list is a plan search. And that gives, depending on the locality, if it's a really, really built up area or a very rural area, it will depend on the search radius, but it gives an overview of planning applications that have been submitted recently in the vicinity of the property. And that could be really important, as if you were buying your dream home as opposed to an investment property, and there was a new development of 150 houses just about to be built on the doorstep, that's really important that you know about that before you're committed to the transaction. Just moving on to the next two points on the bottom of that slide quickly. There are two different types of local authority search. You might have heard the terms bounded around, but there's a regulated or a personal search, and that's a search that's carried out by a search agent on the local authority's records. They tend to be a little bit cheaper and come back a little bit more quickly. Or the official local authority search is carried out by the local authority officials on their own records. They tend to be a bit more expensive depending on the area, and they're a little bit slower to come back. Go back 5 years or so ago, and I would have been saying we need to do official searches all the time, but the quality of the regulated searches has increased so much, and the limit of insurance they need to have in place if there were to be an error in the searches now outweighs what the compensation that can be claimed from the local authority. So 90% of the time, I'll tend to go down the route of regulated searches these days. And the last point on that slide there was all about search insurance. Now, there are some very, very risk-accepting people out there that will say, actually, no, we don't want to have any searches carried out. We'll just insure against it so that if we have an issue in the future, we'll claim against that insurance policy, so we're not out of pocket financially. Not many lenders like it, certainly not on a purchase. On a remortgage, then yep, it's definitely an option. But on a purchase, I'm always uncomfortable about it, as you might not be out of pocket financially, but you might be stuck with a real headache that you have to deal with moving forwards. So it's something to bear in mind for the right time and circumstance, but not for every single transaction. So moving on to the types of title, and I promise I won't go too landlord on you, but there are two main types. There are others, but they're so rare and they don't crop up that often, so we won't go into them. But the main two types are freehold and leasehold. And if we draw a line down the middle, the freehold will typically be your houses and the leasehold will typically be your flats. Now, there is an overlap. You can have leasehold houses, and you can have freehold flats, although freeholds are very, very few and far between. So with your freehold, that's your typical house. Normally, you won't have any ground rent. There will hopefully be less onerous restrictions, so you can normally get on with what you want to do in the property, subject to obviously planning requirements. More and more, we're seeing estate charges that can crop up with freehold properties, especially if it's a newer property. Whereas the leasehold properties, and I've got a few examples of ground rent complications to talk about in a little while. But as we said, they're typically the flats, and it gives the owner of the leasehold title the right to live in the property for the length of the lease. So that value will decrease over time, and we need to be really, really careful if we're looking at a property that's got 85 years or less, and that seems like a really, really long time. But when we get to that point, it gets quite expensive to extend the term of the lease. We also need to be careful with ground rent. I'll come on to that separately, and service charges. We need to bear those in mind, especially if you're looking at it from an investment perspective, as everything that you're going to have to pay out will obviously impact into the pennies that are going into your pocket at the end of the day. And the other thought to bear in mind with leasehold properties, there's normally lots and lots of obligations that need to be complied with. And one that crops up quite commonly is not to use the property for letting purposes, which is obviously a big headache if you're using the property as an investment. But one that normally sneaks in under the radar is to only use the property for residential purposes. And there's been lots of litigation about that, about whether or not using the property as a holiday let or an Airbnb breaches that requirement. And it's been decided that it does. And that one does slip under the radar quite carefully. So if you're looking at the serviced accommodation or the short-term holiday lets, be really, really careful about any restrictions that are in those leases. So there are two types of land. So we've moved from title to the way that land's recorded. Back in the day, before the Land Registration Act kicked in, everyone would have their paper deeds and documents, and they'd be stored in a bank or a safe somewhere. More and more we see that all property is predominantly registered nowadays, as that's a central record of the title, and then all of the documents that are ancillary to it can be readily available. There is still some unregistered land out there. Lots of people will shy away from it, thinking it's a problem. It's not. As long as the title does what it needs to do, there are the rights that they need to get around, and the paper trail can be evidenced, it's absolutely fine. Just one thing to bear in mind is that when you come to complete on the purchase, that will trigger the first registration, and your fee that you're going to have to pay to the land registry will be double what it would be if it was a registered transaction. So the land registry fees will be a bit more expensive. So that's most of the heavy stuff. I thought we'd move on to some examples to give a few practical ideas. But that's a block of flats that we have acted in. It was a little while ago now, but the lease is sensible. There aren't any ground rent complications. It was all too good to be true until we until we spoke to the client and looked through the estate agent's particulars and saw that balcony just in the big picture in the middle. And that balcony wasn't featured anywhere at all on the lease. So that causes all kinds of headaches. Strictly speaking, although it could only be accessed from the property, there was no right for the balcony to be used. And more importantly, it's unclear who's responsible for maintaining it, and worryingly, who's responsible for insuring it. So what would happen if someone fell off of that balcony or there were an accident? That sort of issue crops up more frequently than you would ever think. And it's whether it's with parking spaces, balconies, small garden patios, bin stores or storage areas with flats. But the big takeaway from this, really, really check your plans carefully. If you're in the throes of buying something and it's got a little bit bolted on, like a balcony or a parking space, really, really check the plans carefully to make sure that you're getting the areas that you think you're getting. It's the sort of thing that can be fixed by way of a deed of variation, but it can be quite time consuming, and there's normally quite a bit of pushback to resolving these issues. So it's better if they're spotted before you own it, and then it's solved and it's not your problem to fix. So this next example, it was quite a sizable property, and it had the main dwelling that's in the top picture, great big pasture land, some woodland, and then in the bottom picture that's just in the little octagon shape, if you have a look, there's a little outbuilding to the left hand side, and this one's all aimed about how do we structure a transaction to make sure it's tax efficient. So Dave talked about buy-to-let more, the limited company ways and making sure they're efficient from tax efficient from that side of things. But how can we minimise the level of stamp duty, or mitigate, I should say? How can we mitigate the level of stamp duty? Now, there's a caveat here that whenever we start doing a bit of tax planning, we need to involve a really experienced and qualified tax advisor to make sure that we're not doing anything too far across the line or too shady. But it's important that we can spot these opportunities, as in this instance, we could claim a relief called multiple dwellings relief. So there was, with that outbuilding, enough works were carried out to make it a habitable dwelling, and that led to the ability to claim multiple dwellings relief. And in that instance, the stamp duty went from being, it would have been just under £64,000, with a bit of planning and structuring the transaction correctly. so that we could claim the relief, the stamp duty dropped to just over £10,000, which I don't know about you guys, but to me that's a massive saving and well worth spending some pennies on a bit of advice. So that was just a quick example about structuring a transaction. And I said before that we'd come on to ground rents, and that's a really, really simple table, but that was from a real life lease. It's a Southampton property down on the waterfront. So in year one, the ground rent was £150. Normal, nice, sound. No one's worried about £150 ground rent. That's quite commonplace these days. But the lease said, rather than saying it will increase on the 20th anniversary and then the 40th anniversary, it just said simply the ground rent will double every 20 years. And on the face of it, you think, oh, okay, that's not that scary. Until you do the maths and you think, at year 20, that's going to be £300, year 40, £600. Okay, we get right to the other end of the term and we think it's going to be nearly £40,000 per year in year 160. And then in year 180, it's a huge amount of money. Suffice to say, that lease wasn't acceptable. There was a deed of variation. It was resolved. But it's the sort of issue that can derail a transaction, and it can prove quite costly to resolve. We'd normally have, as I said, deed of variation that varies the ground rent provisions to say it would be reviewed normally in line with the retail price index or the consumer price index. It's normally a bit more frequently, and that way the ground rent tends to move in line with inflation. But those of you that follow statute and legislation changes might be aware that there's a new bit of legislation that's just about to kick in at the end of the month that will abolish ground rent in the majority of residential leases for new leases that are granted after the 30th of June this year. So that will solve the problem moving forwards for new leases. We won't be able to have ground rent in long leases after that point, but it doesn't fix existing leases. It's not retrospective. So we're getting there with the legislation, but it's not quite at the point that it's solved the headache for us just yet. And that example that's up on the screen, it would almost certainly not be acceptable to a mortgage company. I certainly would be reporting that to a mortgage company saying it's not a good idea. We need to resolve this. So ground rent can also cause other headaches if we get to there being a ground rent of £250 or more a year, and the property is outside of London. If it's inside London, the limit's £400 a year. But once we get above those thresholds, it allows, unless leases have Section 8 of the Housing Act excluded, it will allow the landlord to treat the lease as though it was an assured short-hold tenancy if you get behind on the rent. So instead of having your typical forfeiture action to protect your capital that's in the property, that can lead to an accelerated process whereby the property is reclaimed and you lose your investment. So that's another thing that we need to look out for with rising ground rent. So that was Section 8 of the Housing Act. We need to make sure that's excluded. And the last slide I had, or last bar one, just it's not meant to be patronising, but just a few top tips for getting on with your lawyer. And it's common sense, but right at the beginning, at the outset, when you're hunting around for quotes, set the goalposts, set the expectations. If you're working 9 to 5, and you're only going to be contactable during an evening, and you want to be able to have evening consultations, ask the question right at the outset. Make sure that's something that the lawyers happy to accommodate. As if they're not, it's possibly worthwhile looking elsewhere at that point to make sure that you can find the right person that's going to fit within your team. So be realistic. If you've if your solicitor's just received a 300-page contract pack that they need to go through and report to you on, it's not going to take 10 minutes. It's going to take a good couple of hours. So we need to make sure we're being realistic. Knowing where your representative's based is important as well. Normally the investment work, it's done on quite a tight timescale, so everyone wants it turned around quite quickly. And every now and then it can be so helpful to have your representative in the local vicinity, so you can pop in, sign a bit of paperwork that was missed previously, and deal with it that way rather than something having to go in the post or be couriered. And then last but not least, do your homework, be as prepared as possible. If there's any background that you can find out about the property, if there's any alterations that you're aware of, your solicitors part of your team. Work with them, provide them with that information so that you can tackle it and move forwards together. So I think James has just popped up. Has anyone got any questions? In my world, there really is no such thing as a silly question, only the one that's not asked. Please feel free to reach out if you've got any questions now. But by all means, take my contact details and reach out afterwards. Completely up to you. But otherwise, over to you, James.
Oh, Peter, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. Such great content there. If anybody does have any questions for Peter, now's the time. Pop them in the chat box. It'd be great to put those questions over to him. You've got him for as long as the evening lasts, and he's here for you guys. So feel free to do that. Just whilst we're getting that going, a question for you, Peter, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
How long does a bit of conveyancing take, or how long does it take to sell a property these days? And is there anything we can do to help speed it up if speed is of the essence?
Yeah, sure. So it's really difficult to give it. I think that's probably the question I'm asked most often, and it's one of the most, as there are so many different variables involved. If there's a long chain involved, then we're only going to move as quick as the last link in that chain. If you're saying what can be done to speed things up and make things smoother from the selling end, being as organised as possible. I put a post on social media this morning, try and do a Tuesday top tip. Just oddly, it ties in quite nicely. But from a selling end, at the same time as instructing your estate agent to market the property, instruct your solicitor. There's loads of paperwork that can be done, and it might take a little while for you to find a buyer, but then when you do, the paperwork's all ready to rock and roll and be issued straight away, rather than a seller having to put together the paperwork at that stage. So that can shave a good couple of weeks off. And the same goes from a purchasing front. If you know you're going to be trying to buy something in the near future, be organised, get your quotes sorted, make sure you've got your evidence of your identity all together, as you'll be asked to provide evidence of your identity and proof of funds, so where your money's coming from. Time and time again, you'll get fed up of being asked for it during the course of a transaction. Yeah, be organised. Really long answer to a short question, sorry.
No, that's fantastic. I have investors, colleagues that talk about sort of the elusive sort of complete within sort of 21 days or 28 days, as they have a motivated seller and they absolutely need to complete within this time scale. And I've always found it fascinating in that we're generally finding in the sales industry at the moment, in a normal year, it would take about 3 months to complete. Given that if it was COVID time, it's now kind of 4 months.
It's definitely the system's a bit clogged up at the moment. It's definitely taking longer than normal. Those sort of elusive deals, you say, sort of the 21-day deals, they're still possible, but it needs all of the stars to align. It needs all parties to be proactive, and whether or not there's mortgage funding can have a big bearing on that as well. So if we take auction properties as an example, so there's normally 20 working days with a standard auction between the date the hammer drops and the date completion takes place. Mm-hmm. All of the legal work should have been done before the date of the auction, assuming a buyer's been nice, diligent, organised, and had advice beforehand. But that period can be so short for sorting out a mortgage offer if a survey has to take place. And I think it comes, I won't stray into too many stories, but it becomes so important to make sure that your team, so the agents, your surveyors, your solicitor, your mortgage broker, can work well together. As I know, me and Dave have worked well together and saved a number of deals that have been in those circumstances. So I think teamwork's the key.
Yeah, absolutely. It really does hit home at the moment that property investing is a team sport. So having a good team of people in their specific areas of expertise, I think, is really, really important, isn't it, to help you get the best sort of value out of your property and your investing journeys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, great stuff. Well, thank you so much, Peter. Really, really appreciate it. What a fantastic speech from Peter there. Thank you very much. So I'm going to move over to my section now, compliance and legislation, which is which is a subject massively close to my heart, with over about 170 bits of legislation out there that us as landlords and letting agents, we can fall foul on, which could lead to banning orders, fines, time in prison, unfortunately. These do all come to roost. So what I've done is a bit of a whistle-stop tour on lettings and compliance, and just to take you through some topics. I will try and get through these as quickly as possible. So some bits I will kind of rattle through, and some bits that I think are really important, I'll just slow my speech down a little bit, and just try and explain some things. So I'll start off with going through the Housing Act 1988, and then the updates in 1997, and then go through to the Deregulation Act in 2015. Both of these regulations and acts are massively important in how we proceed and interact as landlords, and as well as letting agents, and really form the foundation of how we proceed and interact with our business. I'll go into how to get possession of your property back again if it is the tenants are not playing ball and you do need to get possession of your property back. There's also a big change that's going to be happening with EPCs coming up in the not so distant future, and we're working with a lot of our landlords at the moment to start to strategize these changes coming in. So I really want to go through these with you to give you a good idea of what that looks like and how you can work with that as well, because there are some cost implications here. And they're going to be looking at smoke alarms and carbon monoxide, and then also some rent repayment orders. So here we go. So in January in 1989, the AST was born. It formed basically a structure of how we put tenancy agreements together with a minimum term of 6 months. And this is how we rent properties out now with our paperwork. There are two main ways to get your tenants out if you do need to. The first one is Section 8, which can be issued if there are 3 months of rent arrears in this particular situation. You can, if that happens and you've got this rent arrears, then you can apply through Section 8 notices and get back your possession really quite quickly. The other route is with a Section 21, is to regain possession again for your property through these measures. And there are timescales involved in both, and they offer two separate situations. I can go through that a bit more in detail. Tenants within this act have no rights to succession. So, for example, if you rent out your property for 12 months, they do not have the right for a second 12-month session. You have to renegotiate the second term, which is brilliant. So if the market rates do go up on for the rental income of your property, you can look to have that negotiation or not, as you see fit. It's up to you as the landlord and up to the tenant as well as to what they can afford. There was also, with this act, the removal of rent control. So basically, it is the amount of rent that you pay is very much down to the market. Within this act as well, there are further 17 grounds to get back possession if it is that you need to from your tenant. Revisions were made then in 1997 and remains in place today. There's a minimum term of 6 months. Section 21s are the main form of being able to gain possession, and they must be served in writing, and you must take documentation of it, and we take it with our phones. We physically visit the property and hand the Section 21 notice to the tenant and take a photograph of it. Sometimes the person that we're giving to it, sometimes they smile and sometimes they don't. But this is the nature of the notice. The tenants are entitled to a statement of terms. So if a tenant wants to find out if they're working through a letting agent, if they want to find out who their landlord is and they ask within writing, we are obliged to hand over that information. So that's the landlord's name and their address. Tenants are allowed to communicate with the landlord directly through in writing, and that is a legal requirement to do so. The tenant must be an individual. the landlord must not be in residence for ASTs to be used, and it must be the tenant's main home. If the person renting the property is a company, for example, that you cannot use a tenant an AST. If it's a landlord is in residence, you cannot use an AST. There are other contracts that you can use. So have a chat with us and we can put you in the right direction to be able to use this. So this is specifically for using ASTs. And also they must have exclusive possession of all or part of the dwelling. Exclusive possession is also given as a right to quiet enjoyment. So for example, if you're trying to get work done in the property, let's say, for example, you're trying to renew your gas safety certificate, you've instructed your tradesperson to pop over there, but the tenant says no, you are not allowed to enter because the tenant has the right to quiet enjoyment. So you might ask yourself, well, what do I do there? Because it's a legal requirement to get the renewal on the gas safety certificate. What we do is we show that we need to prove that we show all reasonable measures have been put in place that we attempt to get this renewal. But again, if the tenant says no, then we're legally not allowed to enter. So an interesting conundrum there. So outside of the Housing Act tenancies, as I mentioned, are company lets, landlords that reside in the property, commercial, high rent, low rent tenancies, licensed to occupies, agricultural lets. So for farmlands, we don't personally deal with a lot of those, but I know some landlords do. And any tenancies prior to mid-January in 1989. This is kind of interesting. All the ones I've just listed, you can charge fees for. You're probably aware that a couple of years ago, we were no longer able to charge tenants fees. But if it is for a company let, licensed to occupy, agricultural, you are allowed to charge fees. So an interesting one. So if you're not charging fees, it might be a good idea to have a look into that. Moving on to the Deregulation Act, which happened in 2015. This was also then amended in 2018, and it put together a form, a prescribed form. Prescribed form, if you don't know, this means that you can't change it. It is a form laid out with a fixed structure, and all you do is fill in the details. And this Form 6A forms a part of the Section 21, which enables you as a landlord or a letting agent to seek possession of the property back again. The other documents that you need to provide as well, in addition to this 6A form, are the gas check, the EPC, it needs to be an E or above, the right to rent guide, the prescribed information for the deposit, and any licensing, if it's an HMO, for example. All of these need to be put together in a bundle and taken over to the tenant that you are asking to vacate. And this is what I mentioned, go over there, knock on the door and give them the prescribed form and document it. I use my phone and get a photograph that you've done that. Time restrictions are imposed on serving notice, and it does protect from regulatory evictions as well. So serving notices on eviction. Back in October 21, notice periods reverted back to pre-pandemic periods. So pre-pandemic periods, Section 21 notices were 2 months. During lockdown period, it was 6 months, which did pose a lot of landlords, a lot of problems. But luckily, after the lockdown and COVID has hopefully now passed, this has gone back to normal timescales again. And we ended up, as letting agents, doing a lot of work around that to strategize any section notices that needed to be imposed. The new notice must be used, has to be used by legal requirements, and it has to be provided from the government website. It is a lot shorter version than the old one. It's only 2 pages, which makes it a lot easier to fill in. Once you've done one 6A notice form, it is quite easy to do, but it does have to be done correctly. If any of the information on it whatsoever is done incorrectly and you end up in court justifying your reason for the possession, the judge will throw it out and will side with the tenants. And if you're not getting any rent and they are hurting the property, then it could cost you a lot of money. So make sure that you do get it right, or seek to work with somebody who's got experience in this and doing it with you. It's very, very, very valuable. Compliance for the Section 21 notice, it all needs to comply with the Deregulation Act. So again, if you don't get it right, the judge will throw it out. There are extra documents there, as I mentioned, that you need to serve with it. There's 4 months notice of the initial tenancy have to have passed before you can serve a Section 21. So what that means is if you rent out your property in January 1st, you need to wait until 4 months have passed if it is that you need to get past your possession of your property back again. So you need to wait until April or May to be able to serve one of these. It's 6 months restriction if improvement notice is in place. An improvement notice is if a tenant reports to the environmental agency that there are some improvements needed to the property, and the environmental agency gets involved, then you as a landlord cannot get possession of your property back again until 6 months have passed and you put all the improvements correct again. Other things where 6 months timescale is important is if your HMO license is not in place, you cannot serve a Section 21, or if it's an unlawful tenant, or if you have charged unlawful tenant fees, you cannot serve a Section 21 notice. So it was found historically that landlords were still charging tenants fees, but then when they came to seek possession of their properties or rooms back in their HMOs, if that had happened, then you couldn't serve notice and you couldn't get them out. Section 8 notice, which is the other major way of getting possession of your property back again. This notice, the new section of it, came out in October 2021, and the notice is then reverted back to pre-pandemic times of 2 weeks notice for 2 months rent arrears using mandatory Section 8 or Ground 8. So what that means is after 2 months of rent arrears, you can then apply through the Ground 8 of the Section 8 notice and go through to the courts, and within 2 weeks you can legally evict your tenant through this. And the major reason for this is rent arrears. So if you've got 2 months or more rent arrears, then this is the notice that you would use. Again, filling it in, I would use a solicitor to do this. This is more complicated than the Section 21 6A form, and it does need to be absolutely correct. So either use a solicitor or somebody very experienced in doing this, because it would be a complete waste of time if anything is wrong on it. Moving forwards, Smoke and Carbon Monoxide Act. This one's quite interesting at the moment. This one is coming up for a bit of change. These will be mandatory in all rented homes. CO2 alarms are mandatory in all rooms with fixed combustible appliances, excluding gas cookers. I think the reasoning behind that, it was tested or ascertained that the emissions from the gas cooker were too small to affect anything. So the assessors were telling the industry to put the CO2 alarms usually near the boilers, which give off more emissions. There'll also be mandatory upon installation of any heating appliances. They're also expected to repair or replace once informed from the tenant if they are faulty. So at any point, if a tenant or any tradesperson or anybody in the house informs you as a landlord that these are faulty, they do need to be replaced. And that is a legal requirement. This is a really big one that we're working with a lot of people on at the moment. It's widely expected that EPC, energy performance certificates ratings are going to change probably by the year 2025, 26. This is not confirmed and it's not come in yet, but it's widely publicized that by this time, all rental properties will need to have an EPC rating of C. Now, currently the situation is it needs to have an EPC rating of E or above. So if it's an F, failed. We as landlords need to invest in the energy performance of the property. But I'm finding this really quite interesting in a lot of the landlords and properties that we have at the moment. Is we have a lot of properties in our portfolio as letting agents that are currently Ds. So they do need to come up. So what we're looking at is how much does it cost to bring up the rating from a D to a C? Because if that cost is X number of thousands of pounds, let's say it's £5,000, and the particular property brings in £2,000, or let's make it £1,000 profitable every year, which is obviously not much, I know, but we do have some properties like this. Then if you need to spend £5,000 and you're only going to bring in, £1,000 a year, I think I'm going to see that a lot of landlords are going to be faced with the decision of, do I sell my property or do I invest in it and bring up the EPC? So I think there will be some people that will be faced with that decision, and I can kind of see quite a few properties looking to sell, or quite a few landlords looking to sell, which actually does rotate the rental stock. So it could be great opportunities for us as investors to pick up some more properties and increase our portfolios. There is a cap on the spending to be able to bring it up to a C. If lots of money needs to be spent to be doing that, which is £10,000. But it's really worth starting to factor this into your investing now as the years move along up to 2026, 25, because this could impact your income. And rent repayment orders. Tenants can apply for rent repayment order if any of the below apply. This is quite scary in a way, because what this is if a tenant pays you rent as a landlord, and you're collecting your rent on a monthly basis, but you forget to do a particular piece of legislation or comply with a particular Housing Act bit of legislation, they can recall all of the rent that they pay to you. For example, if you've got an HMO with six bedrooms and everybody's paying their rent, but then somebody finds out that you don't have an HMO license or something like this, they can order you to pay back through the courts legally all of their rent that they have paid to you for the whole year or for the full time of their tenancy. But what's also really scary is, like, I would bet that they would then tell all of their roommates in that house as well. And I have heard of these types of situations where landlords have lost tens of thousands of pounds literally because of them not keeping up with compliance. So as we were saying before, property investing is definitely a team sport. Please make sure that you've got a good team around you to make sure you don't fall foul of these things, because not only will you be losing out on revenue coming into you through the form of rent, but these could also give you banning orders, so you can't operate as a landlord anymore, heavy fines up to sort of £30,000-50,000 on various things, and maybe even time in prison if it's a criminal act. But you can see there, so there's a number of things there, failure to comply with these things. And there's over 170 bits of legislation that does lead to this. So please be warned that these are real. So please work with qualified people that know what they're doing, so help you keep you profitable, safe, and on the right side of the law. Moving on from the there's a couple of extra bits for rent repayment orders. The local authority or the tenant can apply. The tenant can apply whilst residing in the property or up to 12 months after the offence. So the tenant could have already left, but if they find out that you're not compliant as a landlord, then they can apply for these rent repayment orders. A superior landlord cannot be pursued. So I don't know if there's anybody in the virtual room here that are doing rent to rents. But if, for example, if you're renting a property off another landlord and you fall foul of being compliant, you will be the one that's faced. And that comes from the point of view as the superior landlord, the real owner of the property, doesn't know what you're doing as the managing agent of this property, and that's what it's termed out. So therefore, you will be liable, not the real owner. And typically, what they're awarding these days is 75 to 80% of the maximum amount. So again, it could be a lot of money. So please bear this in mind. So that was me. A bit of a whistle-stop tour of legislation, and the really big message here is please look after yourself and keep compliant. If you have any questions or you ever think that you just want to get some more content or ask any advice, please give me a call or email me. I'm more than happy to assist. If anybody wants to book in for a free 15-minute call, then please do use this scheduled compliance call. Does anybody have any questions? Dave, Pete, how do we do?
Sound on?
Very good, James. Very good. There is one question from Rachel on there.
Okay.
So, can you confirm regarding the tenant's right to a quiet, peaceful tenancy? Tenants can refuse maintenance people coming in during the tenancy, even if damage to the property may occur if the work is not done.
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, under this clause of tenant has the right to quiet enjoyment, the tenant can refuse entry, which I know is completely backwards. If your property is damaged, I don't know, there's no hot heating, there's no hot water or whatever it is. It does really become a sticky situation because you, the landlords, need to fix the problem because the problem exists, because they may and also result in future damage to the property as well. But legally, you are not allowed to enter. So you've got to work with your tenants very tactfully, carefully, because essentially you do need to get access to obviously put the maintenance item back again correct and get it fixed. But if they are saying no, then you are not allowed to enter. If it is such a problem that it's an emergency services problem, then I would suggest calling the emergency services and getting them to deal with it. But you just need to use your best words, be I don't know, sometimes be nice or incentivize or help them to achieve what they want. But if they are saying no, then yeah, that's it. Crazy, isn't it?
I had a question, if you don't mind, James. Just sort of taking that particular point. I mean, obviously, as landlords, we all want to get paid and so forth. What do you feel about where does rent guarantee practice and so forth work with that, do you think? Sure.
Well, if we're talking about rent guarantee as insurance policies, I heavily recommend them. We had a property recently that there was a lot of damage caused, and the tenant didn't pay their rent. They subsequently left, but we had a rent guarantee policy in place, and I think they're about £35 a month or so. But what it did was it guaranteed all the rent for the 7 or 8 months that it took to get the tenant out. whilst there was no rent coming in, and also paid for all the damages as well. So rent guarantee policies are absolutely brilliant in my eyes for such a small cost. And I think a lot of landlords would see, like, for £35, I don't want to pay it. I don't want to pay it. But it does cover you if it all goes horribly wrong.
And does that cover the legal aspects if you want to get them out?
Yeah, it covers legal aspects. It covers rent arrears. It covers damages. Obviously, some policies do differ. The ones we use, for example, cover everything. So if you guys are interested in that, I can point you in the right direction. But yeah, definitely advocate it for sure. Peter, do you mind reading out the question there for Chris, from Chris?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of legislative changes, I think this is another one for you two, James and Malcolm. What changes are under discussion for right to succession for tenants and landlord registration?
Oh, I see. What changes are under discussion right now? As far as I know, tenants do not have any rights to succession. There hasn't been anything published or no white papers written on it or anything like this. So if you have a 12-month tenancy, that tenant does not have the right to take on another 12 month. It's just down to negotiation. After the 12 month, it is a simple contract that a tenant will take out a property for a 12-month period, for example, and then that's it. And then at the end of that, you either renegotiate to take on a new term, or they vacate. Thanks for that. Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, any other questions, guys? It's been a real pleasure sort of talking with everybody. We've got through a lot of stuff tonight. Two fantastic speakers, Pete, Dave. Really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much. Is there anything, guys, you wanted to say before we sign off?
Just thanks for having us, James. It's been really, really good, and we've learned a bit from your side as well, which is good. But yeah, thanks, guys, and people for listening to us. And any questions, obviously, please feel free to get hold of us.
Yeah, definitely.
Couldn't say it better myself. No, just say thank you for listening to us. And any queries, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. Really appreciate everybody coming on the call. I hope it was useful. I learned a few things from different speakers, which is always good. I sent out an email. You should have it if you'd like to come along for free to our next buy-to-let advisory, and if you would like to book a call free of charge, no obligation, it's not a sales pitch, with us or the other two speakers. Just take advantage of the link that's been sent through.
Yeah. Great stuff. Thanks, guys. Have a great evening. We'll be doing a few more of these again, so we'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
God bless the Queen.
Absolutely.
Good night, all.